Welcome to the BNB Investing Podcast for real estate investors. Fix and flippers and realtors exploring investment options with Airbnbs and short-term rentals through acquisition, leasing, or management to generate consistent monthly revenue. Join us for a chat with experienced and successful short-term rental investors to hear their story of how they got started and created wealth by building scalable businesses. We also explore various service providers and lenders that help make our businesses more efficient and maximize revenue in this awesome sharing economy. Welcome your host, Rich Monroe.
Hey everyone, Rich Monroe here with BNB Investing Group. Thanks for jumping on this week. As usual, BNB Investing Group is working with investors to help them grow a scalable business. And we navigate the strategies of either doing acquisitions, leasing properties, or managing properties. And so if you're ready to start a scalable business, feel free to reach out to me directly. If you're ready to take action, we'll have a quick call and check in and see if what we're doing here can assist with your process. So super excited today. I've got Kirby Atwell on here with us from Living Off Rentals, and we're going to dive into his experiences, how he got started with short-term rentals, and talk a little bit about how he's helping investor clients as well with growing a scalable business and going after profitable cash flowing properties. So Kirby, thanks so much for jumping on.
It's awesome to be here, Rich. Thanks.
Yeah, give us a little background on how you got started, and we'll go from there.
Cool. Yeah. So I am from the Chicago area originally, and I kind of grew up having a little bit of a rich dad, poor dad experience in my household. So my mom owned an insurance brokerage, an independent insurance brokerage where she started when we were real little and 0 clients, and it was very eat what you kill and you set your own hours, and just went out and started growing her business. And then my dad worked for the park district. So he had a city job, very, secure 9 to 5, and got paid on the 1st and 15th and had a retirement and all that. So I kind of got to see both sides of the coin there. And I was always really drawn toward my mom's business and that whole idea that the harder I work, the more I can make. I'm not constrained by a W-2 income. And so I knew that was what I wanted to do. But then I also knew I wanted to serve in the military first. A lot of my family had served in the military. So I ended up going to West Point, and then I served for 6 years as an officer in the Army after that, and then got out and jumped into real estate pretty much full time after that.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for your service. We really appreciate that. Definitely. So what got you started with real estate after that?
So I picked up the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad when I was stationed at my first duty station in El Paso, Texas at Fort Bliss. And, reading that book, I always call it the gateway drug into real estate investing, because everyone I talk to on my podcast, it seems like that was how they got started. They read that and they're like, I'm doing real estate investing. And it was the same for me. So that was back in 2006. And after that, I was like, I'm going to go buy real estate. So it was like a week later after that, I put an offer in on my first rental property in El Paso and learned a lot on that one. And then just continued to learn from there. And that's what got me started.
And you did a lot of rehabs too before you started rentals, or?
I did. Yep. Yeah. And I'll go over that in the presentation a little bit, but the things that I learned from flipping, because I flipped for 5 years after I left the Army. I flipped for 5 years and learned a lot, but I knew it wasn't going to be the thing that got me to freedom. So then I switched into these higher cash flowing properties, and it's been a game changer.
No, that's awesome. So, we have very similar backgrounds. I did a lot of rehabs as well. And, it just became work. It became a job, and It was a constant grind, trying to get that property finished, get it listed, get everybody paid off and on to the next one. And, it's really, it wasn't a tough choice for me to kind of shift over and, focus into the short-term rental space for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, we can dig right into the presentation. Let's see here.
Cool. Yeah. So let me move a few things on my screen here. Yeah, so I'll go ahead and jump right in then. So as Rich said, I'm Kirby Atwell, and I host the Living Off Rentals podcast. So you can check that out. I've had about 225 guests on at this point, and lots of smart people to learn from. But today, what I want to talk about is going from $0 to $10,000 of net cash flow, and using a niche or a strategy that's literally changed my life. And that is these low cost short-term rentals. And to get there, there's really 3 steps involved. So I'm going to talk a lot about how to pick that right property, the ideal property, then the location where this works the absolute best, and then creating the right systems to make sure that you make the highest cash flow you possibly can. And as we kind of just talked about, I have the unique experience of leaving my full-time job to go into real estate twice. And the first time I did it the wrong way. That was in 2011. It was the very difficult way to do it. So I have that experience. And then in 10 years later, 2021, is when I left the second time. And it's been a lot lower stress, a lot more successful process. And so I want to share with you some of the differences. So in 2021, like I talked about, I was in the military, in 2011, I was in the military, decided that I was going to get out and do real estate full time. I purchased a couple rental properties when I was in the Army. But once I left my full-time job in the military, all of a sudden I didn't have the ability to get longer term financing. And so I decided to start a flipping company. So moved back home to Chicago and partnered with a couple buddies from high school. And we started this flipping company. My dad was involved as well. He had just retired. And so he helped us out. And we kind of just learned as we grew. And we started with just a couple properties. And then we started growing the volume and the size of the deals. And over the next 5 years, we flipped just over 70 properties around the Chicago area. And I learned a lot about having a house flipping business. And I'm not against flipping houses. I think if an opportune flip comes up, take it. I still do flips here and there, but there's a huge difference between doing an opportune flip and having to do 4 or 5 flips a month because your entire business relies on that income. And that's a different setup. And what I realized is that it's a very time intensive and labor intensive process, and that it's a hard thing to systematize because every property is different. And so you're always working with different contractors. And so a lot can go wrong, and there's slim margins that are unforgiving with flipping. And then at the end of the day, after you've gone through all this, you're only paid one time and you got to start all over. So this is what our cycle looked like. We would put out we'd spend a whole bunch of money for marketing. Then we'd have to meet with or field a ton of calls, then meet with the top prospects of sellers, then finally, negotiate a deal. Then we'd go through the whole rehab process, and then we'd go through the staging and selling process. And hopefully we would make some money if everything went as planned. And then we'd pay taxes at the highest tax rate on the money that we made. And then anything left over, it felt like we just put right back into more marketing, paying our staff, paying the overhead for the office. And we just took enough to survive on. And it was this constant cycle that, eventually I felt like, I was going to die on this treadmill, that I'd never get off this thing and never get ahead, because we kept thinking, we'll just do more deals and bigger deals and that'll get us ahead. But it was the same cycle. So it was 2016, finally, after 5 years. I'm a slow learner. And we were expecting our first child, which is Rex there in the middle. And, it caused me to start asking different questions, around what I want in life. And, it took me back to 10 years prior to 2006 when I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad for the first time. And it caused me to ask this question around why did I get into real estate in the first place? I'm not loving this. It's not, giving me any freedom and stuff. So I was like, what, and so I did a lot of soul searching at the time. And I think for people tuning into this, if you're just going through the motions, I think it's worth it to sit down and really ask yourself, like, what is the outcome that you're actually after from all this? And so for me, it always kind of went back to freedom. And, there's a couple examples here that really illustrate the difference between what I was doing then and what I was doing now, and how it relates to higher freedom. So here's a flip. This is one of the last flips I did with our flipping business in 2016. It's in Frankfort, Illinois, which is a south suburb where I was living at the time. And bought this property for $208, and then we sold it for $315, and we put in about $50,000 so of rehab. And so, after, a lot of people just focus on the purchase and rehab, but after your cost of capital is taken into consideration, your staging costs, your property taxes, your insurance, all that stuff is taken into consideration, and then the taxes on the actual profit that you make. There was probably about $20,000 worth of profit on this deal. So not like a grand slam deal, but not a bad deal. I'd take $20,000 if someone's giving it to me. And but a lot of people like focus on, well, I made $20,000, and they think of it as like a one day they made this amount. It was a 6-month process to get there. So when you're flipping, you have to really look back over that 6 months and say, okay, how much per month did I actually make while going through this labor intensive and risky process of rehabbing a property? And so did the calculation. That's like, just over $3,000 a month. So, not terrible, but, it was a lot of work, and then you have to start over. So I compare that then to my strategy that I do now, these low cost short-term rentals. And this is a property that I own now, and we bought it in 2020, and it's very similar numbers to what I just showed you, higher rehab cost, because this thing was super nasty. We took like 8 dumpster loads of garbage out of this thing, and we found a pool in the backyard that we didn't know was there after we started cleaning out the backyard. So
yeah, those are usually more of a headache to find a pool than it is for a luxury, because it's usually either got to fill it up with dirt or you got to take it apart and get rid of it.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And it was just a jungle back there. So it was, we got rid of it. And so we put, we bought it for $75,000, put in around $100,000, plus we furnished it. And so it took about the same amount of time, about 6 months. And instead of selling this, though, what we decided to do is refinance it. So we still had a similar amount of profit as that flip I just showed you, but we still have that profit. It's still sitting in equity. We just refinanced the property. And then we put it on Airbnb, and it's been on Airbnb for the last 3 years now. And this is our booking calendar from 2023. So all the green days are the days that were booked. And in 2023, we brought in $84,800.21. And so when I look at in our expense ratio is just over 50%. So in other words, just under half of this is actual net profit after all our expenses. So that's about $40,000 of net income that we made from this property. And so when I look at that across the whole year, that's about the same as what I made per month on that flip.
Right.
But at the same time, that's coming from cash flow. So it's not coming from the profit on the flip. It's coming consistently month over month from cash flow. And that will just continue into perpetuity. And I don't have to go out and find another flip deal to continue to make that. And on top of that, I still have that original profit in equity, plus the fact that this property's increased in value over $100,000 since it was refinanced back in 2020. So, such a better system. And that's, to me, how you get to freedom. In 2016, I was pretty much living hand to mouth. We're doing these deals, we're doing all this, all these flips, but I had no assets. I had nothing that was going to pay me in a perpetuity. And then in 2021, a few years later, after doing some of these these properties like I just showed you, now I had enough recurring income that I could quit my job and be financially independent just with a handful of the type of properties that I just showed. And to me, it's not about like making money so that I can buy stuff. I don't really care about stuff. It was always going back to time and freedom. So, we live in Northwest Indiana on a farm, and we're kind of living our ideal lifestyle where we spend a ton of time with our kids. We get to kind of set our lifestyle by design. Last year, this is a picture from Costa Rica. We went for a month last winter to Costa Rica, and I worked from there and could do the exact same thing that I do here in Indiana and manage our properties from there. And we just got back a couple weeks ago from Florida, where we're building a couple of duplexes that are going to follow a similar model, and we'll use those as well. So it just affords you a lifestyle that if I was in my W-2 job still, there's no way I could do most of this stuff. So that's what it's all about for me. And this isn't like a one-off theory. You mentioned it in the beginning, but since I've gotten to financial freedom and replaced my W-2 income using this model about 3 years ago, I've worked with about 200 other people now to implement this same strategy that I'm about to share with you, to buy really high cash flowing, low cost, short-term rentals. So it works. So, sorry, were you going to say something?
Yeah, well, I was just going to ask a quick question before we keep moving. So that property that you use as an example that you purchased for $75,000, how many bedrooms was that?
So it's a split level. And when we bought it, a split level is like where you walk in and you can either go down to the basement or you can go up to the main living area. And when we bought it, it was a 3-1. So 3 bedrooms upstairs, the 1 bathroom and a living area. But the basement was all just full of garbage and junk and stuff they collected, unfinished. So we finished that, turned it into another living space. So now we added a living space, a bathroom, and 2 more bedrooms. So it was a 5-2 then. So
Nice.
We sleep up to 12 people because we've got a pull-out couch as well. And so we can host some really sizable groups.
Did you end up keeping the pool and fixing it up, or did you have to fill it in?
No, it was actually above ground pool, and it was just
okay.
Just
demoed it, move it.
Yeah. We did find a patio that was buried because we were digging up a bunch of stuff, and there's this concrete patio back there that we just uncovered, and we're like, wow, this is nice. So we put a fire pit out there and had this nice patio. Then it was buried under like a foot of dirt.
Cool. Now you might be covering this in the next part, but I think you mentioned you guys were self-managing, correct, as well, on top of the acquisition piece.
Yeah, and I will talk about we have sort of a unique take on management.
Okay, cool. I'll let you keep moving then.
Cool. Yeah.
Those of you guys that are jumping on, just make sure if you could throw a quick yes in the comments so you can hear us okay. And then feel free to throw any questions out. We'll try to save some time towards the end to answer any questions you guys might have with Kirby. Go ahead,
Awesome.
Kirby.
Cool. Yeah. So let's dive into the steps in this process then. So I'm going to talk through the 3 steps. First one, starting with picking the ideal property. And where most people start when they get into real estate investing or rental property investing is they start with the long-term, typical rental house. And that's what we did. This is one that we used to own in the south suburbs of Chicago. And it's good. But what we realized is a property like this, we're making about $250 a month after all of our expenses and set asides and stuff like that, which, if you can find $250 a month on a rental house these days, it's turnkey. That's pretty good cash flow. But we realized that the numbers on our spreadsheet and what actually happened didn't always translate. So we'd have a tenant move out a year later, and we'd have to rehab the house again, and that $250 would get used up. And then even if it did work out that $250 was the actual net cash flow, we realized we needed 40 of these properties to get to a place of $10,000 a month or financial freedom, which was going to be a lot of properties. So what a lot of people do then is they say, well, that's too slow or not enough cash flow. So now I'm going to transition to a more traditional short-term rental. And some of the challenges with the more traditional short-term rental is, there's a much higher cost of entry. These properties in a lot of cases are more expensive. There can be a lot more amenities and a lot more cost to operate. A lot of these markets are becoming extremely competitive. And then, if you're buying like a higher end vacation rental, if all of a sudden the economy turns or the rules change or something like that, either you can do a long-term rental and bleed thousands of dollars a month of negative cash flow, or you can sell it at the same time everyone else is realizing they have to sell as well, which probably isn't going to be a good exit. So I like to have backup plans. So I discovered over a period of time through a lot of trial and error that you can kind of combine the benefits or the ideal aspects of both a long-term rental and a traditional short-term rental and into a combined property that kind of has the best of both worlds. And that's what this yellow house that we own right there represents. So it's a 3-unit property in Michigan City, Indiana, where we primarily invest. And some of the benefits that this property provides is that it's lower cost. So this 3-unit, we're all in after a purchase and a full gut rehab. So every unit is perfect for $325,000. The majority of the population, the middle-class population can afford this. We're averaging about $148 a night. So it's less in the winter, higher in the summer. We have literally hundreds of reasons that people stay with us. Every time we think we've heard it all, like somebody will say some other new reason that they're staying. So it books for so many different reasons. It's not just high-end vacations. It's people traveling for any reason that somebody would book a hotel for. Obviously, we have multiple streams of income. We list each unit individually, and then we have a super listing. So this place will host 16 people with the super listing. So large groups, especially in the summer, that want to travel together can stay together and book the whole place. It cash flows as a long-term rental as well. So this property hits right around that 1% rule as a long-term rental. So if we ever had to convert it back, we're still cash flowing really well. And the most important thing is that it creates massive cash flow as a short-term rental. So we're hitting net cash flow right around $45.72 per month of average net cash flow after all of our expenses. And the way that breaks down, I'll show you, by unit how that breaks down. So these are the 3 units. We call them Breezy Beach, Scenic Skies, and Wild Woodlands. We kind of themed them a little bit. But each one averages about $148 per night. So that equates to $444 total. And even if we book out for less than 2/3 of the year, we're still making over 6 figures of gross income, or $9,058 per month on average. And so then you look at our expenses, and because the price point's so low, our mortgage is low, insurance is relatively inexpensive, taxes are really low in Indiana. So our expenses are pretty low on this property. So that's how we get to $54.72. And there's no cleaning costs in here because that's a separate fee on top of the nightly rate that we charge our guest, and then that's paid directly to the cleaner. So it's a wash, but our net cash flow is $54.72 on this property. So that's the power of properties like this, where there's multiple units in these low-cost areas.
And so, Kirby, are those 1-bedrooms or studios, or what's the mix of those?
They're 2-bedroom properties.
2 bedrooms.
Yep.
Perfect. Got it. Okay.
Yep. Dan, who I work with, is another great example of a property that another great example of a guy who just bought a property that fits this model. And he's doing it in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, close to where he lives. He just bought this duplex on Park Hill Avenue in Milwaukee. He closed right at the end of last year in 2023, and he bought it for $310, putting about $45,000 into rehab. It was relatively turnkey, but he made it look really nice, and $25,000 in furnishings. And he just listed this Airbnb on Airbnb not this past Friday, but the Friday before. And here's his very conservative estimates. So 168 a night times 2, because it's a duplex, 61% occupancy. So he's making 66.39 gross with 37.46 per month expenses and 28,093 per month average cash flow. And that's his listing that he just went live with on one of the listings. So he's got 3 listings, one for each unit, and then again the super listing. So yeah, so that's the power of this type of property. So then the next question that comes up then is, where do you find these types of properties? Because it's not in every market. So picking the right location. So when most people think about short-term rentals at first, they almost always default to, I need to be on the beach or have the 8-bedroom themed Disney property that's next to Disney World, or the ski in, ski out place, or the Joshua Tree property, or the Smoky Mountains property, the traditional markets that it seems like everybody sort of competes for, because it feels like, I think initially, that's the only place that short-term rentals really work. And I think all those places can work. I don't want to say that they're bad. I think you just need to be super cognizant of what your specific goals are, because if your goal is freedom, then I think the equation of finding the place that has the absolute highest income, the highest nightly rate and occupancy compared to the lowest cost, is how you get to freedom the fastest. And so the place that I always recommend for people to start is the place that's on sale. If you look at a map of the US, it's like, compared to the West Coast and the East Coast, the Midwest and Southeast are just in general on sale. It's just a lot cheaper. And there's exceptions, obviously, and pockets that aren't as affordable. But generally inside this box, it's pretty affordable. And so there's 8 factors. So if you start with the Midwest or Southeast, it gives you a really good start. And then there's 8 factors that I've distilled it down to. If you can find a location that has as many of these factors combined as possible, I can almost guarantee you found a place that will lead you to financial freedom the quickest possible. So the first one is, we start just outside of larger cities. So on this map, there's probably 100 different cities that are of size, maybe a couple hundred cities of decent size. We don't buy in the cities because typically that's where the highest regulation is. That's where the most bureaucracy is, the highest price points are. But just around those cities, typically there's a whole bunch of towns and suburbs that are very short-term rental friendly, and they're much more affordable.
Guys, give us some likes if you're getting some good nuggets here on this information. Give us some likes, throw us some love.
Oh yeah, I see a couple comments coming in. Yeah, this is great. Yes, cool. So the second factor to create the ideal location is business friendly. So pick an area. Like, we used to live in Chicago and we moved over to Northwest Indiana. When I was investing in Chicago, everything was difficult. There's tons of red tape. There's lots of taxes, lots of fees, high crime, lots of corruption. It was just difficult to get anything done. And so I moved over to Northwest Indiana, and it's like the opposite. There's just a lot lower regulation, a lot less fees, a lot less taxes. It's just so much easier to run your business and build a business. So if you've got the option, pick a business friendly area. Local draws, so not like the Disney worlds, but a water park or a beach or a casino or a museum or wineries, stuff that, in addition to all the regular reasons why people will travel, like weddings, funerals, family visits, having some local draws is a big benefit as well. Positive future projections. Again, going back to the Chicago example, it felt like every factor was leading to difficulty in the future for Chicago. Like taxes are going through the roof. They're highest in the U.S. already, or one of the highest. Crime rates increasing. Like the state's bankrupt. Like there's a lot of factors that were making me feel like 20 years from now, or 30 years from now, or when I leave these properties to my kids, because that's the terms I think in. I don't think in like I'm going to buy and sell this property next year, but 20 years from now, am I going to be a lot happier or be really happy about owning a property in this location? And not that Northwest Indiana is like the perfect location, but all the factors are kind of going in the opposite direction here. And so I feel really good about where the properties will be 20, 30 years from now. Short-term rental friendly rules. I think if you just read mainstream media, you're going to think that short-term rentals are banned and everywhere, and that, it's a lot of times the articles are just about like the main the main cities and some of the biggest short-term rental areas. Meanwhile, there's tons of areas that are actually really short-term rental friendly. They're inviting to short-term rentals, like where we invest. They had a city council meeting saying, should we make rules around short-term rentals? And they're like, we love short-term rentals. It's helped revitalize our city and bring more people in. And that's where I want to invest, because they make it easy. There's no fee. There's no inspection. There's no cap. There's no, it's a great environment to invest in. Properties that work as long-term rentals, like I talked about. And then this last two are sort of a combination. So again, going back to that ratio. So you're looking for the ratio. You can Google in any area to find out what the average purchase price is for that area. And then you can go on AirDNA and figure out what the average income is for that area. So the combination of average nightly rate and average occupancy. And that tells you what income you can expect. So you're looking for the ratio that's most in your favor. So if you can find that where it's most affordable and still has a high income level, which these aren't correlated. A lot of people think, well, if I'm buying in an inexpensive area, then it's going to be a low nightly rate and occupancy. That's not true. There's a lot of places where there's local draws that are super affordable. Somebody I work with is investing in the Bourbon Trail. So perfect example, just outside of Louisville, larger city, in these smaller towns that are super affordable in Kentucky, but yet there's hundreds of thousands of people that travel through to visit these distilleries. And so you've got constant people coming through, and there's not enough places for them to stay. And so you've got a great income on these properties, high nightly rate and occupancy. And especially if you get a multi-unit property, now you've got multiple streams coming in on a really affordable property. So this is the example of our market and how we kind of use the rules to our advantage. So a lot of people who live in Chicago think of New Buffalo, which is up here, as the main place that you kind of go to get out of the city and go to Lake Michigan and visit. But several years ago, they put a cap on short-term rentals. And so they only allow that they grandfathered in the ones that existed, but they don't allow new ones. And so if you think about what that does to an area, they haven't limited demand whatsoever. All they've done is cut down and restricted supply. And so just as many people want to book a short-term rental there. And then that grows every year. More and more people use short-term rentals. So when they search on Airbnb, there's not nearly enough that pop up in New Buffalo. So what Airbnb does is just zooms out on a map and recommends our properties in Michigan City. And so we get all that spillover demand in Michigan City that used to or would have gone to New Buffalo. And, it helps the business owners in Michigan City because people aren't going to drive to New Buffalo to have dinner, and so get a lot more traffic in Michigan City. So this exists all over the place. Anywhere where they've restricted or made rules around short-term rentals, which Atlanta, where you're at, Rich, is another example of this, where the rule is people can only own 2 Airbnbs or short-term rentals, and one must be the primary residence. You must be a resident of Atlanta you must pay $150 annual permit fee and an 8% annual tax or rental tax. So, I've heard that this isn't really enforced heavily, but still, it's tough to build a business in a place where, you're always worried if they're going to crack down. And so, but that just applies to you can see the outline of the city of Atlanta. And then all around the suburbs here, which, I'm not super familiar with because I've only been there a few times, but I can guarantee you that a ton of these towns are very short-term rental friendly or don't have restrictions like that. And so just as many people want to visit Atlanta and want to book a short-term rental. And so where does that spillover demand go? To people who own just outside of that city. So it's a great way to kind of use those rules to your advantage.
Yeah, no, and a quick update on Atlanta, because I'm actually the president of a nonprofit that is currently negotiating with the city to redo those rules. So you're right, they haven't been enforcing it because they've been kicking the can down the road, and we're getting close to renegotiating terms with them. They are going to be stripping away the primary residency component. Nice. And then we're looking at more of a global cap proposal versus the limitation on 2. So, we're optimistic that that's going to change. But you're absolutely right. There's a lot of markets that are very similar to this. Orlando is another good example of that, where you've got Disney down there, but you've got Kissimmee that like you described, welcomes short-term rentals. So there's like 17,000 listings in Kissimmee because they recognize the tax revenue and the benefit of having folks come in for that. And so it's definitely a good thing in each market. So a quick question, when you are looking at your different markets here and your target areas, is your starting point and preference multifamily, duplexes, triplexes, and quads, or are you indifferent to that?
Absolutely. Yeah. It doesn't have to be traditional. I think that's where, when I say multi-unit, that's where most people's head goes, is like the traditional side-by-side duplex or one up, one down, or triplex. But any property that has multiple streams of income. So it could be a property with a finished 2-car garage, and so you got 2 units coming in. If it's in a relatively affordable area, you're getting it for a low expense ratio, but you've got these multiple streams of income. The net cash flow overall is just substantially higher, and it could be a pool house in the back. It could be a finished basement. It could be a tree house. I mean, you can get super creative. I'm standing in our barn on our farm, and we built one in the corner of the barn. And so I've got my podcast studio out here. My wife has an antique shop in part of it. We've got a gym on one side. And then we built this 800 square foot Airbnb that sleeps 6. And that thing pays for our entire 45-acre farm, just nice. From the people staying there. And it constantly is booked up. So you can get super creative. And then we book out our main house too at certain times when it's convenient for us. We just leave it up on Airbnb, and we only accept bookings that are at a price point that's like a make me move type price point in weekends that we want to travel. And you can book out both listings.
Very cool.
Yeah, so that's the location that's sort of ideal for this strategy. And then the final component is just setting up the right systems. And like you mentioned, we do self-manage, but what I've seen is that a lot of times people consider self-manage as them doing everything. And I've seen a lot of people get sort of burnt out because it can be time intensive if you're doing everything. It can be stressful. It was for us in the beginning. Like, we learned a lot doing everything ourselves. And you can never really turn off with short-term rentals because you have guests staying there. So a lot of people then go, well, this kind of sucks. I don't have much freedom here. And so then they go and hire a professional manager, and they pay 25% of their gross revenue. And then in a lot of cases, that professional manager isn't as good as they are because they've got 100 properties to manage, and you're just kind of a number. So, what I see is people end up choosing between either time freedom or financial freedom. And it's kind of ridiculous because the whole point was getting to a place of freedom. That's why you got into this business in the first place. So, as you probably noticed, I don't really like binary decisions where it's like either A or B. I like to combine the best of both worlds into a strategy. And so if you buy the right short-term rentals, it allows you to combine elements of both, self-management and professional property management into a low-cost, high-touch system that provides you with time and a really high cash flowing property. And the way we do this is that we define, and we didn't do this the first year, and it caused a lot of stress. But since then, we've defined absolutely everything that could potentially come up boots on the ground. And they're assigned to one of two people. So we have the handyman or utility person, as we call them. It's kind of like a handyman plus. And we've got our cleaners, which go beyond just typical cleanings. And we've defined everything that each one is responsible for, from supply restocking to landscaping, touch-ups between guests. If a guest shows up at 10 o'clock at night and they can't log on to Wi-Fi, who's responsible for that? Because that's going to come up. Even though it doesn't come up often, it's going to come up. So what happens if at 2 a.m. a pipe bursts? What happens when we're furnishing a new property? Who's responsible for that? So once you've defined all this stuff, the scary part is when it's not defined, because then it feels like, oh, all this stuff can happen. Well, once it's all been defined and assigned to a person who's responsible for it, it's no longer scary, because that's just their role. And if you look at the cost difference when you set up a system like this, I just pulled an example property. This is our analyzer tool, and I just did a screenshot of the expenses. This property brings in around $7,500 of gross income, and here's the expenses, an expense breakdown. So you can see what the mortgage is, taxes, insurance, all that stuff, utilities, Wi-Fi, snow removal, consumables. So with $4,600 of expenses, we're making a net income of close to $3,000. Now, if we were to go out and hire a professional property manager, this would add a 25% of our gross income expense right off the top. And if you notice, that doesn't change any of the other expenses. It's not like by paying that person almost $2,000, it saves us, on cleanings, or it saves us on our maintenance or anything like that, because we're still paying the handyman, we're still paying the cleaner, even with that person in place. So it's just another layer to line up those two people that we could have easily lined up personally. And it doesn't, and so that comes directly off of our bottom line then. So that 1875, so our net cash flow then goes from almost 3,000 to 1,000. So it's cut to a third of what it was. So if you think about from a freedom perspective, a financial freedom perspective, how much longer it takes you to get there when you add that in, as opposed to just having some good systems to do that yourself.
Makes perfect sense.
Cool. So to tie it all together, I want to share an example of somebody who's doing this right now, because he just closed on this property yesterday. So Alvaro is somebody I work with, and he just bought this property in Battle Creek, Michigan yesterday, and he followed my system, and he bought this. It's a 2-unit, and these are the listing pictures, so you can see it's pretty turnkey. They just rehabbed it, and here's the numbers. Here's how this one's going to work for him. So he bought it for $165,000. And again, pretty turnkey. He's going to put in, some money into to a few updates, cosmetic stuff, and then furnish the property. So about $40,000. So, and then he's going to have a $292 average daily rate between the two properties. So not like an extraordinary average daily rate, and also not an extraordinary occupancy. We always recommend being as conservative as possible on your projections. So even if this property is sitting vacant for almost half the year, here's still what his numbers look like. So he's making $65,30, and he's netting about $3,000 after all his expenses. So if you think about how long it would take him to get to $10,000 a month of cash flow, it's just 4 of these properties, and he's well over that. I mean, he could make a lot of mistakes and still be at $10,000. Meanwhile, he lives in California, so he's never visited Michigan in his life. He closed yesterday. The keys went to his handyman, and they started the process of getting it all furnished and updated while he still works his full-time job. And so he's gonna manage this process from there. And so if you think about like the difference between a full-time job where you make $12,000 a month, that's about $150,000 annual salary. And if you think about W-2 income compared to actually $12,000 from rentals, it probably needs to be $200,000 to be the same, because it's taxed so much worse as W-2 income. But instead, owning 4 of these types of properties, you're making net over $12,000 a month. And the amount of work that's involved in doing that, I mean, he could still work his full-time job while doing that. So that's the example of how this strategy can get you to those numbers pretty quickly.
Very cool. And so a lot of your clients are basically able to do this in any market, not necessarily in their backyard.
Exactly. Yeah, it works whether you're down the street or across the country. And we have properties 20 minutes down the road that I haven't visited in over a year at this point, because I treat them as if they're remote, and we rely on our system.
Yeah, we do the exact same thing for that reason. When you set the first one up, you got to act like you're not the one going to do stuff, because you're not always going to have the luxury of being remote, or being close by. So that makes sense.
Exactly. Yeah. So just to tie this all up, the big question that comes up for a lot of people is, will this work for me? My question to you is, can you follow steps? Because it's not a get rich quick scheme. It's really just a step-by-step process to get you to freedom in the fastest, most efficient path that I've ever seen. I've done pretty much every type of real estate investing strategy out there, and this is the one that I've seen more people get to financial freedom with than just about any other that I've seen. So like I said, I've worked with about 200 people to do this, and there's just a couple of comments people have made who have worked with me, and if you have, I'm willing to answer any questions, and also you can set up a call with me if you're interested in working together on this. I'm more than happy to talk through whether this fits your goals and answer any questions you have.
Awesome. It's been very informative. I've actually put your email address as well in the comments if you guys want to reach out that way. Also do a search for Living Off Rentals podcast, and you can check out Kirby on his podcast as well. And so cool. Before we shut it down, I know we have quite a few people on. Are there any questions that we want to throw out there before we close out? And so I have a quick question. So when you're working with clients, you mentioned that this one that just got set up, are you guys the one that are doing the staging and setting up of the property for this client, or how is that working?
No, we talk you through options for that. So some people want to do that, like my wife. If I wasn't married to my wife, I would never touch a Amazon box or a bed frame or any of that stuff. And I've told her at this point, like, I'm done with that part of it. We can hire those people to help you, because she loves the design aspect. So she wants to design everything in the properties, which is cool. But what I recommend to most people who fit more my personality profile is to use home stagers, which are often overlooked. People typically default to designers, which tend to be pretty expensive. Home stagers have inventory of furniture that they're always wanting to turn over, that most of the time has never even been sat in. They have people to set stuff up constantly, because they're constantly setting stuff up, taking it down. They do this all the time. They're relatively affordable. So I always recommend finding a really good home stager. We've bought out entire warehouses of home staging furniture in the past, and it's a great way to get this done cheaply and efficiently.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. So we have another quick question. Do you have a minimum number of days or maximum number of days per reservation?
We have 2 as our minimum, unless there's an orphan day in between longer bookings and it's a 1 day, and then we increase the price typically there. So they're paying a premium for that because the lower the price point, typically, the worse the guest, and we don't want to have a 1-night booking. That a lot of times that's where the problems come from. So typically our lowest is going to be 2, and then in a busy season, when we're far out, like for the summertime now, we have a 4-night minimum on, so that we can get big chunks of bookings on the calendar, and then we'll open it, or we'll lower that minimum night to fill in the calendar, because we know that pretty much every single night across all of our listings will be booked throughout the summer.
Sure. One other question: do your cleaners handle laundry?
Absolutely. Yeah. We put laundry in each unit. So we put a washer and dryer in each unit. Different people do it differently. Some cleaners like to take the linens with them. We've tried that with cleaners before, and it's just been more difficult. It's easier for us just to provide the washer and dryer there. We have multiple sets, so that as soon as they strip a bed and they're washing it, they can take the other set that's clean already and make the beds. And that way they're not wasting time waiting for washers and dryers and stuff.
Sure. Cool. All right. Awesome. So Kirby, I really appreciate you taking the time today. Thanks for jumping on. And everybody, feel free to reach out to Kirby directly. Let him know B&B Investing Group sent you over there. And then if you are interested to learn more about what B&B Investing program does as well, we have a similar program that works with clients, investors, to help them grow a scalable business. Feel free to reach out to me directly. Best thing is on Facebook Messenger. But thanks everybody for tuning in today. Kirby, thanks again for jumping on. This has been really cool and informative to kind of understand your angle and how you're getting after these cash flowing properties. Very informative.
Absolutely.
Thanks again for coming.
Thanks. It's great.
All right. Appreciate it. Take care.
Thanks for jumping on the BNB Investing Podcast this week. Please click on the subscribe and like button below. For more trainings, property tours, and content, you can join my BNB Investing Facebook group by clicking below. If you are ready to grow your short-term rental portfolio and maximize your monthly income, you can click on the link below to schedule a quick strategy call with Rich or someone from his team to see how we can help or point you in the right direction. Stay tuned for our next episode and hope to see you on the BNB Investing Group podcast.